EP6. I'm your host, Aaron Jistel. I'm the broker, one of the co-founders here at ListingSpark. Here at ListingSpark, we help people get their homes sold fast, easy, and for the most money possible while keeping thousands of dollars in commissions in their pocket. We are located here in Austin, Texas, but we operate all over the state, selling in all the major markets here in Texas. Today, I'm really excited to bring on Greg Naughton of Magnets REI. Greg has been an investor in the Austin area and a builder as well. And so we're really excited to talk with Greg today just about all the ins and outs of what it takes to build new construction and invest in the Austin area, talk a little bit about what's going on in the market. And so, Greg, I want to turn it over to you real fast. Just give us a little bit of information about yourself before we get started.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks for having me, Aaron. Looking forward to our conversation today. So I have been in construction for a very long time. I started out after a corporate career in technology. I started dabbling in remodeling and had a handshake partnership with a good friend. This was in Nebraska. We built some improvements there, remodeled some basements, and that eventually kind of turned into, after the move to Texas, into running a franchise here called Mr. Handyman. We continued our remodeling gig and did a lot of the handyman things for a long time as well, about 10 years. Of course, that triggered my interest in investing and not just working for the client, but kind of doing my own thing. So we got some education here locally with some groups and dove into that. I have been doing some investing now for about 10 years or so. And then we made the leap from remodeling, only remodeling projects, to doing the build thing. We currently today build anywhere from 2 to 5 houses a year in the Austin metro, mostly in East Austin. They're what we call infill projects, where we can build a couple of houses per lot. So other than that, we continue to be active in investing in different areas of the marketplace. We do a lot of passive investing nowadays, but we also do some remodeling occasionally.
All right. So I think we started working together. Gosh, it's hard to believe. I think it's been like almost 6 or 7 years ago. We met we were doing some marketing at some networking events for investors and builders. And I think that's how you and I got connected. And at that time you were doing mostly fix and flips. And we were able to work together on one of those projects. And it's been really cool to kind of see your business grow and evolve over the years and take on a bunch of new and exciting projects, especially on the new construction side of things. And so, building new homes anywhere can be challenging, but in Austin, Texas, there's obviously its own set of challenges when it comes to obviously building permits and zoning and code issues and things like that. So I wanted to question right out of the gates. Let's talk through what are some of the primary challenges of building new construction in Austin?
Boy, Aaron, we could fill up your whole show just talking about this issue. The challenges are many. And first of all, there's the whole COVID era, the last 2 years, which has added a level of challenges above and beyond what you would normally have to run into and face. Shutdowns of factories, reduction in workforce, and so on. But I'd say all of the challenges here locally could be rolled up into one major category, and that's navigating the process, the build process, the land development process with the city of Austin. So that I don't even know where to start on that. You can get a lot of information from the Austin website, the City of Austin website, austintexas.gov. If you're new to this and you want to try to get something going, that's a good place to start.
I think a good place to start is like, so let's kind of first maybe talk through timetable. So for somebody that's in the investment world and they're thinking about maybe getting into new development and building. So right now, let's say you've acquired a property, and whether that's raw land or you got to scrape an existing house from start to finish. If you want to build a house in Austin right now, that's more of a either a spec or a high-end custom home or something like that. What is the timetable that most people should expect start to finish right now?
Well, again, the somewhat predictable timetable prior to the last couple of years is kind of out the window. But I'll give you a couple for examples. Just trying to get a permit with the city can take anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. So if you're buying a property, you're going to scrape it, you first have to go through a demo permit process. Once that's acquired and you get past that, then you submit for your building permits, and it's another wait time. So I would say the normal expectation right now, I wouldn't plan on anything less than a year from start to finish. If in that scenario where you're buying a property and you're going to have to demo.
Right. Okay. So fair enough. So that's probably a bit longer than it used to be, or longer than most people would expect. I remember there was a time frame when you would go buy. I know it's a different story, but you go buy like a KB or a DR Horton home or something like that, and they could build those things in like 3 to 4 months, knock them up real fast. And I obviously they probably have their own set of challenges too, but it's certainly a different dynamic trying to understand and kind of analyze the market right now. Let's say if you acquired a property a month or two ago and construction's not going to be done for 10 months, kind of figuring out how to adjust to a changing market is certainly a challenge. So for somebody that's been in the business now from a construction phase for over 20 years, but investing for more than 10, what is some advice that you would give to other investors or builders kind of adjust in a changing market?
Well, those volume builders, they kind of have a leg up on the little guys. They, of course, have more clout with the city and can maybe do things a lot faster than some of us smaller builders. But if you're new and you're just starting out and you're going to try the building, trying to develop and build new single family homes or duplexes or whatever, you really need to get some education on that first. My recommendation would be to get a mentor, which is what I did in the beginning. Even though I had the remodeling experience, I hooked up with a couple of local builders and just kind of shadowed them around and got some of the inside baseball tricks with the city. Now that's an ever evolving thing, so it's hard to keep up, even for seasoned builders. It's hard to keep up with the changes that happen at the city. The code is old; it's way overdue for a rewrite. You've probably seen some of that in the politics and the public sector. Code Next, I'm sure you've heard of.
Yeah.
So what we've got is a really old code that's very difficult to navigate. Takes a lot of expertise. And you need to have, good architect to work with, good engineers, people that live inside of that code and the city's processes on a daily basis that can help you navigate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know I was talking with a couple of our agents here who also do investing and building on the side as well. And we had a conversation not too long ago, and I think this will be a good little segue. So right now, obviously the market is changing. We're seeing inventory climb. We're seeing homes sit on the market a little bit longer. And so I'm curious your take on in this kind of market that we're in. Let's say you're building in East Austin, you're building in a higher end area where your price point could be anywhere from $700,000-$800,000 all the way up to several million. In this kind of market now, do you try to lean in to do the higher end finishes and try to have maybe a better product? Or are you worried more now about trying to just control your costs and making sure the unit economics work and you can kind of maybe get in and get out with a little bit less risk? Is there a certain strategy that you'd be following now that might be different from where you were, let's say, 2 years ago?
Well, that's a great question, Aaron. I'm a firm believer in a quality product. I would never sacrifice that. So I would tend to, and am tending to stick with the high-end finishes. Kind of knowing what your buyer pool is looking for is important. On the east side, a lot of our homes get sold to younger people in the technology industry. So having good Wi-Fi connectivity, something simple like an outlet for your electric car is important. There's a lot of things that that I do that I'm not going to change. And as far as the overall time frame, so yes, you're going to have to find a balance to answer your question of mitigating risk as much as you possibly can by watching your costs, but stopping short of cutting corners on the finished product, because you want to be able to sell that.
Sure. Yeah, I know right now, as we kind of watch our inventory come in, and what's nice about here at ListingSpark, we list anywhere from 100 to, upwards of 200 homes on any given month. And these are properties anywhere from $30,000 lot or a $50,000 or $60,000 tear down in kind of an outskirts town in a suburb of one of the major metros, all the way up to $4 or $5 million spec house, and everywhere in between. And one thing that we're seeing for sure is that the homes that are struggling a little bit right now are the ones that are in any way unfinished, sloppy, where buyers walk in through and it feels like, okay, these are things that I either have to get on this investor or builder about to finish before we close, or this is going to be an item that I might somehow inherit and have to deal with on my own. And when a buyer has options and they can go and look at 4 or 5 other houses in the same neighborhood that are probably in a similar price point, obviously that's something that a lot of buyers are not going to tolerate now that they may have had to tolerate again a year or two ago when every house is going multiple offers and over asking price and all those kind of things. So I think definitely right now investors and builders have to really focus on delivering a very high quality product to the market. And I think not cutting corners is certainly a big way to do that, but also just making sure that they're kind of understanding what goes into the marketing aspect of it. So for example, we work with a lot of builders that are building on spec, meaning there's no client that contracted them to build this house. They're purely doing a design build home that they're doing for an investment purpose to turn around and sell, which I understand is how you're running your business. So a lot of times what they'll do is, they'll market the property when it's, the slab is poured and maybe it's up on sticks, the framing's been done, but it still might be 3 or 4 months down the road before it's finished. Have you dabbled in that idea to try to go the pre-sale route and sell it maybe before it's even done? Or do you feel like it's a better strategy to just get the project 100% done, show everybody how nice it's going to be, and then find the buyer at the end?
Yeah, that's a matter of preference. We mostly wait until the product is finished. We have on occasion done some pre-marketing before it's quite complete, but it's mostly complete, but before we do that.
Yeah.
It's hard for a lot of people to see the finished product, and if you show them something that's incomplete, it might raise some questions. That's a double-edged sword as well with bringing a client on at the end of a project and having to manage the changes or the wish list that all of a sudden comes out of the blue.
Sure.
Is a little bit different than when you started. So we mostly complete the products first, but in the past, in the last couple of last many years, that's been a kind of a benefit of the marketplace. You really didn't have to do much to sell a house. They were just flying off the market. So you could easily sell it before it was complete. But we tend to like to see the finished product and showcase, the quality that we put into it at the end.
Yeah, I think one of the big disconnects sometimes between the consumer and the builder is the buyer doesn't understand necessarily how much things cost and how that can differ when you're choosing out countertops or flooring or things like that. And I think a lot of buyers would love to go in and pick out all their finishes on their own. And there's a lot of these home builders that you can walk into a design center and you can kind of pick and choose everything and build a semi-custom home. But I think when you're building a spec property and bringing in a buyer kind of mid-phase, it can be a huge challenge to kind of let that buyer have free reign over the choices, or even semi free reign over the choices, because they don't quite understand what everything costs and what it takes to make those changes, whether it's a small item or even structural item. I think there's probably a big disconnect between the consumer and the actual builder, and that's got to be a challenge in and of itself to try to navigate. So I know personally, I think it's a good idea to kind of sell the finished product, especially if you don't have the infrastructure in place to be able to make those quick pivots, or be able to work with a more picky buyer that's going to be constantly kind of changing things around. Also, I think you hit the nail on the head that sometimes buyers can really struggle to visualize what something is going to look like when it's done. And it's hard to trust that when you're marketing a property mid-phase. And so you have to kind of lean on renderings or examples of other builds that you've done in the area that might give a good example of what it might look like. So most of the new construction that we're selling is done that way. They're bringing in the buyer after the project's done. Yeah.
Yeah, and if it's a good quality product, it's going to sell itself. I have seen what you described, some incomplete, a lot of punch list items that have to be completed yet, and that's a turnoff for a buyer going through a house. So, unfortunately, they're still out there, or fortunately, they are still out there. And when they see those houses compared to mine, it's an easy decision.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always like to get in the mind of somebody who's a builder or investor. And so, Greg, if you were building your own personal home, what are some of the must-haves that you would make sure are absolutely included in that house? That they give some kind of tips and tricks and secrets to the consumers out there.
Well, that's a very personal decision for a lot of people. When you get to be a little longer in the tooth like I am, and you've been through many homes, you've learned along the way what you like and what you don't like. And so it's easier to come up with the things that you want to put in your own house. But good functional spaces are important to have just in general. Nowadays, a home office is almost a requirement.
Sure.
Low maintenance exterior items are always good. Nobody wants to spend their whole life out in their yard fixing it up, keeping it maintained. Good energy efficiency is important. That's not a very sexy thing to talk about, but it can make a big difference throughout the time that you live in your home. So good insulation, good quality windows are really important. Something that we do in all of our houses now is we put a recirculation system in the plumbing, so that many of your listeners have probably experienced the turn on the water and wait for it to get hot. It takes forever. Well, that's something that you can put in early on. You have to put it in early on in the process to make that work good, and it's a real nice to have.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't always understand when you're building the house, that's the opportunity to kind of have a lot of those perks to be customized and put in place, because retrofitting things can be a challenge a lot of times. You mentioned earlier that a lot of your demographics on the people buying are more in the younger, maybe tech scene. Are there any technology packages or anything like that you're seeing that have become super popular, or people are asking you to install in homes up front?
Well, good smart home features are important. Wi-Fi is an everyday thing and expected nowadays. So we still continue to wire the houses with Ethernet cable, because that's let's face it, that's more reliable.
Sure.
But if you design the right infrastructure for Wi-Fi, you can kind of distribute that connectivity and have good speeds throughout the house. So that's something important for all of our tech buyers.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Greg. So you've been doing this for a really, really long time. Between whether it's new construction or it was a fix and flip, what's been one of or the most challenging project you've had, and why?
Oh man, I'd have to say I'm probably in the middle of it right now, Aaron. So I have an East Austin infill project with a lot with 2 houses. We bought that property in June of last year. Went through the demo process. We finally got a building permit in February. So that's 6 or 7 months into it just to get to that point. We were making good progress, and unfortunately on July 11th, I had a fire at my site, and both of my houses were fully framed and one of them burned to the ground.
Oh,
So,
no.
so that was a major setback, to say the least.
Sure.
Going through fire and insurance investigations and whatnot. We have fully recovered now, but it set us back for 3 months. So at this point, we've got the houses fully framed. But when you think about all the challenges, the questions you've asked me earlier about what do you need to know, how do you get started, navigating the city processes, and then you throw that in on top of it. Well, that's probably that was an easy question, because that's probably the one that's been the most challenging so far.
Wow. Did they figure out where the fire came from or where it started from?
Yes, unfortunately, it was arson. It was deemed arson. Thanks to the cameras mounted on the neighbor's house, was a homeless person that started the fire. That person is in jail. Hopefully, will stay there.
Wow.
But unfortunately, it wasn't only my site. These houses on the adjacent properties to the left and to the right both caught on fire. Everyone got out. Fortunately, no one was hurt.
Oh my God.
It's a narrow lot, 38 feet wide, so it didn't take much for the fire to spread.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know a lot of our investors that are doing flips are really having to focus a lot more on security now than maybe they did in years past, and they'll buy those kind of smart cameras that you can just kind of move around from property to property, and unfortunately, you talked earlier about costs and supply chain problems and all that stuff going up. So a lot of people are very opportunistic about theft as well. Is that anything you've had to encounter thus far, as finding materials that are missing on the job site or anything like that?
We have, and that's always been a problem. It seems to have ramped up here in the last year or so. Because of that, we put temporary construction fences around all of our projects, and we do use the security cameras. And that can help. At least it can maybe catch a license plate, but and it certainly helped in this case with the fire, because it caught the face of the person and was well known in the area.
Wow.
But yeah, I would do everything you can to secure your site, because if it's just left wide open, that's a crime of opportunity waiting to happen.
Sure. Yep. Well, we touched a little bit of it earlier on some advice to newer investors or builders getting started, and I think you gave some really fantastic advice talking about finding mentors, and I wanted to kind of touch on that before we roll into a little Q&A. One thing that we're really trying to do is educate people when it comes to real estate and provide them value here on this podcast, but any client or customer that we're working with. And I know one of the biggies for investors that are now kind of just getting started in this market, or they're coming out of, if you were a flipper or an investor that started, let's say, within the last 2 to 3 years, you probably had the market bail you out a lot more than you might have even realized on some of your projects. And so when a home ends up selling sometimes for $30,000, $50,000, $70,000 over the asking price, and the margins kind of shoot through the roof, those are wins that you just can't quite calculate. And I think what a lot of people don't really understand or haven't had to fathom yet is what that might look like when they're not gains, but they're losses. And so I know right now some of the biggest advice that we're giving to people, especially if they're buying or they're selling their house and they're kind of re-entering the market again. And it's this age-old adage that, you make your money when you buy, not when you sell. And I think we're going to be in a time frame where that's going to be more important than ever. Do you have some certain strategies that you like to use when you're analyzing the acquisition side that you'd like to share or kind of talk through when you're determining a value of your purchase price?
Well, I do tend to be a little conservative. You never know what's going to come up during the life cycle of a build project or even a remodel, fix and flip. So I like to say you can never see in a fix and flip, you can never see what's under the floor behind the walls. So
sure,
you want to build in some contingencies, certainly into your projections. Allow for those unknowns. I always do. And that adage is very true. You make money on the buy. So over the last few years, you could say the last 8 years, whatever you paid, it didn't matter because the price just kept going up. But
right.
we're entering a new era now. Things are leveling off at best. The Austin market is still very good, as you know. There aren't enough houses. There are still lots of buyers, companies coming here, people are following. So as long as there are buyers, there are going to be, there are going to be builders to build houses.
Yeah, totally agree. I think one of the big things that people need to understand too, and learn up front, and whether you're in the real estate investment space or whether you're just a buyer or seller, I think people can get caught up in falling in love with the deal and kind of not understanding the market economics or not understanding what's going on in that particular area. And they'll look at a couple comps, they'll see there's a few good sold homes that kind of justify the value, and they run with it. And nowadays, what we're seeing is the micro markets, or we're not looking when we're helping a seller analyze their property when they're about to hit the market. We don't really care what's going on in the rest of the city or the rest of the zip code or, a block of neighborhoods. We want to know what's happening with your neighbors. Like what is happening with the comparable properties to yours that are similar square footage, year built, finishes, things like that. And that's really where investors need to hone in on understanding what's going on in the very micro scale of their neighborhood, because we've got a couple deals that are going on right now that have been big challenges for investors that really haven't had to face these kind of problems in a long time. So for example, we have a couple listings that are over in South and East Austin, and by the time their house hit the market, it just so happened within a 30-day period, there was a massive pool of investors that had all bought and flipped the property and were ready to hit the market. So we had this big flood of inventory. And at that point, you get a lot of people that are in hard money. The interest is piling up. They've got to sell, and they start to what we call chase down the market. It's just price drop after price drop. And I think kind of understanding market timing and things like that are really important as well. But I think the main thing that we try to educate people and make them understand is that you have to really hone into the very localized data points of the neighborhood that you're buying or selling in, because that's ultimately what's going to drive your value. You don't get to cherry pick and hand pick a sale that happened 2 or 3 miles down the road across a highway somewhere else. You might have a few buyers that are looking in a broad area, but when a realtor, when an appraiser, when an educated buyer is looking at the home's value, that's what they're looking at, what's going on in that specific neighborhood. And I know that can be a challenge when you're building, because where we are now isn't where we're going to be in a year from now. But are there any other kind of tips or tricks that you use to kind of analyze an area and decide where you might build in and where you might stay away from?
Well, I think you nailed it. It can be very, very specific. I have purchased properties in the past where I thought, well, this is pretty close to other areas that have done really well for me. And as it turned out, well, they weren't on par. The same zip code doesn't always get it.
Sure.
So I don't think you could do anything better than what you described, which is really looking at closely like walking distance. Now, certain neighborhoods, you know, on the east side, it is fairly predictable, but there are certain streets that can really be gotchas. So knowing that area is very important. I try to enlist help of people that know the area maybe better than I do, to avoid a catastrophe.
Sure. Yeah, it never hurts to get an extra set of eyes on something. I think we get asked all the time, take a look at this. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Does our price jive with what you would price it at? And sometimes we're spot on and sometimes we're not. And like we had one of our investors that we work with out of Dallas, he's had a property on for 30 days and this was a pretty big project for him. And one thing I noticed was, well, your house is 3,000 square feet and you're the highest price home in the neighborhood by over $100,000 because the average home in the neighborhood is 1,500 square feet. So you're literally double in size from everybody else. And I think in hindsight, if he could probably hit the redo button and maybe pass on that property because it's such an outlier and it requires somebody to go in and really want the biggest, most expensive house in the neighborhood when the average house in that neighborhood is half the size and, well over $100,000 less. So, I mean, those are the kind of things that really we want to focus in on, is that in real estate investment, when you're trying to maximize your profits and do these things, a lot of times it's not good to be the outlier. It's really good to have predictability and kind of be able to say, okay, I know these homes sold for this and I'm going to build a similar product. So I've got a very high likelihood of me getting an in price that's similar to that, rather than saying, well, if I just build something bigger and more expensive, I'm going to make bigger money and bigger profits. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. Maybe as much as it was a while back. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree. That the size of the house can make a big difference on what you're able to bring when you're ready to sell it. We've overbuilt in the past when we didn't need to. We found out really there was a sweet spot, maybe somewhere between 16 and 1,800 square feet, where we built a house that was 2,200, and it really didn't need to be that big, and for that reason it sat a little longer than we wanted it to.
Sure.
Conversely, on the east side, there are a lot of small houses and people want more space. So we do things like, build out what the city calls a habitable attic, which is really bonus space. And when you compare the price of that house to some of these smaller ones and the space that you get, it looks a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Greg, just as I expected, that was fantastic insight. We're at about the 30-minute mark. It's amazing how quick that goes by. So I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So we've got one question in the hopper right now. So compared to when you started building, what are you doing differently now?
Oh, let's see. Well, I like to think that I'm a lot smarter about the processes with the city. So I maybe do a little bit more planning, and I'm a little more selective on the property that I buy. I pay attention to things like, what are the trees that are on the site? How large are those trees? How many trees? What's the buildable area? So you can, what's the access in and out of the neighborhood and onto that specific lot? What are the easements on the lot? What are the limitations? So there's a lot of things you can look at early on in the planning stages that might save you a lot of headaches and frustrations as you go through the project.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I know, especially in Austin, for good reason, Austin loves its trees, especially like big heritage oak trees, or so they've got a threshold. Once a tree trunk gets a certain, I guess, width around, you can't cut it down. and you have to actually build around it. And they're going to look at things like where that root system is spreading, which is going to put limitations on that lot and what you can build or what you can add onto and things like that. So there's a lot that factors in if you want to do a big project, whether that's build or do an addition or things like that. And so,
right now, there's always a way. And we've built on lots that are like obstacle courses with the trees. So a good architect can work around that, but it does create challenges with working around the root zones and limiting the space where you can drop materials and things that you don't anticipate normally unless you get through it a number of times.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, if anybody has any more questions out there listening, feel free to chime in on the chat. We're going to stay on for another minute or two. Again, Greg, we really appreciate you coming on. Any other thoughts or insights you want to add while we're seeing if anybody else wants to chat in?
No, it's been my pleasure, Aaron. I hope that somebody can walk away with at least one good takeaway. They can always, get in touch with me through you if they have any questions that they want to follow up with later.
Yeah, it's a great point. So anybody that wants to get connected with Greg, if you guys have any questions, I know, Greg, you mentioned early on that when you first started getting into whether it's investing or building and developing and things like that you did have mentors. Do you ever partner on any deals? Is that something that you're open to? If somebody's got a lot or somebody's got a project, is a partnership opportunity something that you're ever interested in?
Oh, absolutely. We've done partnerships many times. I have to say I'm a little selective about that,
Sure.
But yes, absolutely, we'd be open to that, and it's something we do on a regular basis.
That's great. One thing that I love and that we've kind of learned over the years in the investor community and going to a lot of these networking events is that, just starting conversations, if you have a property, getting it into the right hands. So like, for example, somebody brings you a deal and let's say that deal is not for you. I'm sure you'd probably be able to point them in the direction of somebody else that might be willing to work it. And so, the saying your network is your net worth is very true when it comes to real estate investment. So I think that's some other advice that we always give to young investors is like, just get out there, find events. It was tough during COVID, but if you go on meetup.com and just find investment meetups out there and start networking and meeting people like Greg and other people that have been in the business for a long time. If you've got a deal, somebody out there will fund it. Somebody out there will probably partner with you. Somebody will find a way to make that deal work. And so, that's the hardest part really is finding the deal, but everything else, if it's a good enough deal, everything else tends to fall in place.
Yeah, it might seem like the end of the world when you're first starting out. You wonder how you're going to find your first deal. Sometimes It does take a while, but it's amazing how time goes on. As time goes on, the deals will just start coming to you when you make yourself known out there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Greg, I think we're coming up on time. That was fantastic. I really appreciate you joining us today and obviously very valuable insight for us. And I want to thank everybody tuning in. Again, this was episode 6 of Real Estate Real Fast. We do these on Wednesdays around 1 o'clock. So if you're tuning in live, we really appreciate you joining us. You can also check this out if you had to hop off or you're joining us late. We're going to circulate this. You can get a copy of it. Or you can find it on the ListingSpark Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube page. And if you ever have any questions, real estate related or otherwise, feel free to reach out to us. We're always excited to talk shop. And if you'd like to get a hold of Greg, you can comment in. We're happy to get you connected. And I can tell you from working with him for the better part of a decade, he's an absolute pro. He is one of those investors and builders that likes to do it the right way. He doesn't cut corners. He puts out a fantastic project and product. So he's a great guy to know, a great guy to get connected with. And Greg, thanks again so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Okay. All right. Thanks.